Has anyone ever heard of declaring defense? This is a euphemism for an otherwise necessary evil and signifies allegedly that the country only fights in self-defense. Fourth example, selective pacifism. We all know that pacifists will not fight under any set of circumstances, but by being selective, one leaves open the possibility of fighting when he pleases and retains all the moral order of a pacifist. Is there any way of distinguishing behaviorally, not by rhetoric, among a pacifist of the selective persuasion, a militarist, and the normal type of behavior? Fifth example, nonviolent force. You may now do anything you wish to do, even employ force, but the force is accompanied by the rhetoric of appeals to nonviolence. Sixth, symbolic speech. Any act of behavior other than speaking that is illegal or immoral may claim the protection of the First Amendment on the grounds that it is symbolic speech. Seventh example, selective censorship. One who appeals to this is not in favor of censorship. There are just some books and some people who ought not to be allowed public exposure. Is there a difference between this and pure unadulterated censorship? Eighth example, script assimilation. This is otherwise known as forgery. Ninth example, social subtraction. This is otherwise known as murder. In conclusion, I should like to relate this section on definition to the section wherein I discussed gaining the sympathy of the audience. If you are going to be really creative in your thinking, then I suggest that you incorporate concepts that at least sound like the concept you know your audience accepts. Preferably, you should follow up the very concepts or ideas you appeal to in that section of presenting your case. Analogy. When we assert an analogy, we are claiming that two things that are similar in one or more respects will be similar in another or future respect. Two things are analogous when they are similar in one or more respects. The greater the similarity, the stronger will be the analogy. However, similarity is not identity. Hence, there is always some point at which the analogy will break down. This is not necessarily a handicap, since it is only important that the similarity holds in those respects which are relevant to what you would like to prove. Figurative or illustrative analogies are not meant to show literal similarities in structures or functions. Rather, they are literary devices for dramatically exemplifying a point. If you use figurative analogies, you should make sure that the analogy is definitely positive and favorable to your case. At the same time, the analogy should reinforce the kind of sympathy-appealing devices you used in the first part of your presentation. At all times, the predisposition of the audience should be kept in mind. An example of a figurative analogy, that is, at the same time, an example of an ad populum appeal, is the so-called ship of state. For example, Thomas Carlyle made the following statement: "Running a government is like running a ship. We need a strong hand at the helm." Henrik Ibsen makes the following analogy: "Society is like a ship. Everyone must be prepared to take the helm." Alexis de Tocqueville makes the following analogy: "Like the navigator, he, the statesman, may direct the vessel which bears him along, but he can neither change its structure, nor raise the winds, nor lull the waters which swell beneath him." Driving home the conclusion. The point you are trying to make, the case you are presenting, must be epitomized in the conclusion. Everything you have done up until now has just been preparation for the conclusion. First, you have tried to gain the implicit trust of the audience. Second, you have presented data for the express purpose of backing up your conclusion. Naturally, you should have had your conclusion in mind when selecting the information to present. The question we raise now is how and in what form that conclusion should be presented. There are certain key words and phrases that not only signify to the audience that you are drawing the conclusion, but at the same time reinforce in the minds of the members of the audience that your conclusion is the right one. The following key words and phrases should be used profusely when stating the conclusion. 1. Obviously. 2. Certainly. 3. There is no question that. 4. Of course. 5. Surely. 6. It is clearly evident that. Evidence and conclusion are related to each other in at least one of two ways. Either the conclusion is a specific instance and the evidence consists of generalizations under which the specific instance falls, or the conclusion is a generalization and the evidence consists of specific instances that support the conclusion. Let us look at the first possibility. This is the movement from the general to the specific. In arguing for a conclusion about something specific, let's say the prohibition of marijuana, we may appeal to the generalization that all drugs are or should be prohibited unless given under medical supervision. Let us now examine the second possibility, the movement from the specific to the general. Statistical evidence is more often than not an example of going from specific cases to a general conclusion. Political polls of voter opinion are now frequently used as justifications for making policy decisions for the whole country. In fact, one might argue that elections are simply crucial polls. It is, of course, possible to defend a position or a conclusion by using both general and specific information. In fact, the strongest arguments usually have this double-barreled kind of support. To defend the conclusion that prostitution ought to be legalized, we might appeal to the general principle of free enterprise, which encourages everyone to compete in an open market and offer any product or service he can to the public. But not having legalized prostitution with medical supervision, we are encouraging an illegal monopoly on the part of the mafia or others. Moreover, and here we appeal to specific statistics, AIDS is killing more and more people every year. In addition to presenting evidence for why your position or point of view is correct, there's no reason in the world why you should not point out the residual benefits of your solution. In fact, a long list of residual benefits frequently serves as the deciding factor. To begin with, act as if your solution had only positive residual benefits. Second, know what problems outside of the one under discussion are most on the minds of the audience. Third, claim that each and every one of these major problems will also be solved, or at the very least ameliorated, by adopting your position on the specific issue discussed. Although this tactic may cause some shock and surprise, I maintain that the only limitation on this procedure is your imagination. Let us consider some examples. Suppose I am arguing against the use of marijuana and in favor of strong laws prohibiting its distribution and use. I might add as a residual benefit that the generation gap is caused by or exacerbated by the use of marijuana. Adopt my solution and you solve both problems. Even the Cold War can be defrosted if our youth are clear-headed, and they can only be clear-headed if they are not smoking pot. Now let me argue for the legal use of marijuana. Legalize pot, and even encourage parents to smoke it rather than drinking alcoholic beverages, and you will bring the generations together. Moreover, if everyone sat around smoking pot and making love, no one would ever feel aggressive enough to want to make war. The real clincher to any conclusion is the use of emotional language, either positively toward what you favor or negatively toward what you oppose. If you are absolutely sure that your audience is with you, then you can wrap up your presentation by simply restating your conclusion in emotive terminology. Nonverbal devices. The discussion of emotive terminology leads naturally to a discussion of the other subliminal devices of which one must be aware in presenting an argument. As Marshall McLuhan never tires of repeating, the medium is the message. Here again, your assessment of the audience is crucial. What preconceptions do they have that you wish to use? Find out what these are, and the nonverbal devices are obvious. For example, clothing is important. A boy was arrested for the possession of marijuana. The boy had a mohawk haircut and was wearing black leather clothing with spikes when arrested. By the time his trial hearing came up, his entire appearance had changed. Short haircut and Brooks Brothers suit. In oral presentation, voice is important. Your voice must be sincere and confident, but above all, it must be deep. Absolutely everyone I know is impressed by a deep voice, and there are even exercises you can perform to deepen your voice. Facial expressions and eye movements are also important in this respect. The general rule here is to look people straight in the eye and never have shifty eyes. People with shifty eyes are automatically considered devious, whereas any man who looks you straight in the eye must be honest. The nature of the room or general surroundings are also important. I have heard a story to the effect that former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover stood on a raised platform behind his desk when meeting an agent for the first time. The principle implied seems to be that height adds stature as well, and it is true that we are impressed by tall men.